Om Vedanta Siddhanta Niruktiresha Brahmaiva Jivaham Sakalam Jagatcha Akandarupa Stiti Reva Muksho Brahmadvitiye Shrutayaha Pramanam. Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. It is the apt and final conclusion of the Vedanta that all is Brahman. Time, space, living beings, and the world, living in constant recognition of this fact, is what is called enlightenment. Brahman is pure and perfect, and one without a second. And the revealed scriptures are the sure and certain proof of this fact. Om peace, peace, peace. Om utkramantam stitam napi bunjanam na gunanvitam vimuda na nupashanti Jnana Chakshu shaha. Om Shantihi, Shantihi, Shantihi. The deluded do not see him. Who departs, stays, and enjoys. He being conjoined with the Gunas at that time. But they see who possess the Jnana Chakshu, the eye of wisdom. Om peace, peace, peace. Om Sahana, Om Sahana Vantu, Sahanau Bhunaktu, Sahaviryam Karavo Vahai, Tejasvi Navaditamastu Ma Vidvesho Vahai. Om Shantihi, Shantihi, Shantihi. May Brahman, divine reality, protect us. May Brahman sustain us. May Brahman illumine our thinking consciousness. May we not find fault with each other, with the world, or with the teachings. And may what we study be a source of inspiration to us eternally. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om. The time has come for our second class in a series of 4 classes, which has to do with the very esoteric title called Jnana Chakshu, which I just chanted about, chapter in the Gita, I think 10th chapter, and Sloka 5 if you want to look it up. So the Jnana Chakshu, Sri Krishna mentions, is that center there, which Kundalini Yoga refers to as the 6th chakra, probably the highest chakra, because the 7th is not really a center as it's defined. It's where all these nadis, or these subtle nerves that are flowing inside, conducting various things like prana and psychic prana and Shakti, and hopefully Kundalini Shakti herself coming up the 3 central channels. That is, as far as it goes before non-duality takes over. You might say that there's 2 petals there, so there's still a slight sense of I and thou. Could be described as witness consciousness, or Atman, at that time. Shankara likes to say that in his Vivekachudamani, where he talks about taking the word and words, and merging them in the mind, and merging the mind in the intellect, and merging the intellect in the ego, then merging the ego into the witness, Sakshi Bhutam. And finally, merging all of that into Brahman, as if that's one meditation. You can do that every day, to, at the end of each day, maybe to remind yourself that all is Brahman, which is the second chant I gave. Brahmadvitiye, it's Brahman is one without a second. That's all that exists. Everything else is a offshoot, or an expression, or a manifestation, or a projection, or an illusion. Different grades of describing the appearance of the non-actual, or the appearance of the mutable, or the appearance of change, the appearance of transformation, the appearance of transitions, the appearance of name and form, time and space, and cause and effect. You can go on with Vedanta listing all of these very nicely with a sound philosophy, because that's what's standing you in good stead. And I would say the fullest understanding would come to the person in full possession of that kind of higher wisdom. We call it Paravid. If one possessed this third eye of wisdom, that is, one's consciousness could rise in meditation there, center, and then run a boatway, as Sri Ramakrishna said, from the heart chakra to the Ajna Chakra and back again. Hridaya or Vishuddha, sometimes Anahata, Vishuddha, Jnana Chakshu, or Ajna Chakra they call it. Until this sense of all-pervasiveness, that is a word you might be able to assign to the Sahasrara, the 1,000-petaled lotus at the crown of the head. As consciousness comes there and everything burgeons into light. Even sound becomes light. And everything is shot through and through, permeated through and through with Brahman and Brahman alone. Which is the case here, too, even at the lower chakras, the 3 chakras, because we said last week that the heart chakra is in the middle and that there are 3 above and 3 below. Sometimes a definition they give for, in the Kundalini system, for the 7 chakras or 7 worlds. And I did my homework some years ago when I looked at this phenomena, this spiritual phenomena called the Ajna Chakra, or the third eye, and found that you might be able to find in India as many as, significantly, 7 different systems of 7. I thought it was very apropos that each rishi that was, or each luminary, sometimes even an avatar, classed very high, had talked about or spoken from the standpoint of an interpretation of 7 that was prevalent in India all that time. As I said, even in other traditions you've heard about, Judaism and Christianity and so forth, 7 castles or 7 tiers of consciousness or awareness. And so India maybe was the one that not only expounded that originally, but kept it going through many ages. And that's what I want to look at briefly today. We won't take a lot of time with it, but I want to go back to the Wisdom Eye chart that we didn't finish last week. But you do remember that when we looked at it, we saw that most people were using their gross senses only and looking down, looking out. And then there was the ability gained by a practitioner to look inward using 5 subtle senses. And then we said that there was even 5 causal senses that were like subtle tanmatras, or very subtle ideas in the mind of God, that probably were seeds that gave rise to the senses and the elements as everything, as consciousness burgeoned and spread itself out in the many worlds, which you'll see here, and through the millions of beings that take bodies there. Causal bodies, subtle bodies, and gross bodies. In this day and age, pretty much we know about gross bodies. Yes, the body is kind of gross, but we're using the term or word gross to mean solid or vibrating very densely. We know the mind too can vibrate very densely, and it can also vibrate in a very fine manner. In one case you have some very diluted thinking, and in the other case you have some very refined thinking. But we also know that beyond thinking, non-thinking is also a platform that is cherished in India. If you can, in your meditation, keep the mind from vibrating, keep the intellect from vibrating, that's more in line with the subtle, with the causal, deep sleep we'd call it, or the causal state, where the intellect stops vibrating, ego stops owning, and the mind turns from dual to non-dual, and the thoughts disappear, or they become very refined, like they did when the rishis came back from their meditations and gave us these kinds of systems. And we will look at that chart I'm just mentioning on the level of I think maybe even 7 different religions that mention this Jnana Chakshu, or this third eye. And how that can be interpreted this day and time in this age. Last week I was saying, using the subtitle here, for those of you who believe there's more than matter, for those of you who believe that there's more than just the physical body and the senses objects of pleasure, then these esoteric systems would fill a hole, or fill a gap in thinking consciousness for you. And you would have somewhere to go where you would find words like intuition, or find words like precognition, or a deeper knowing, formlessness even, non-duality, and everything that ushers it in by way of spiritual practice. Words like tapas, or austerity, or renunciation, or detachment, or discrimination between the real and the unreal, which are all words that fill your vocabulary if you take to the Vedanta, which is one of the things which we are doing in America, some of us, thanks to Swami Vivekananda's visitation to us in 1893, and again in the early 1900s. He came twice and brought us these great teachings to a nation, as far as America is concerned, that was very much excited about the occult. If you found them either dancing in tents, singing hallelujah, or going into parlors, doing seances to try and contact their dead ancestors. So there's some direction in all of that that speaks of bhakti or jnanam. The intellectuals would be going into their parlors trying to conjure up things, but they're doing it based on the occult idea. Yet the ancestors are still there back inside of them, so they have kind of a direction that they're leaning towards. They're probably just not very availed of this deeper wisdom, which tells you in Vedanta that if you knew about these 7 centers, or you knew about some of these systems, that all you would need to do is meditate and turn off the mind, and even in dream, deeper dream, you would have these things come to you. You wouldn't have to seek them, or maybe fake them for the sake of taking somebody's money. So, on the other hand, the dancing in big tent revivals and so forth was the kind of bhakti that was beginning to develop, mostly based in the Christian tradition, and but with the different kinds of people that were there, Caucasian, Negroid, Latino. I mean, everyone was beginning to find Jesus, and that was one of the go-to moves for religion in the 1800s, the 1890s. So Swami Vivekananda came over and saw this all happening at these different levels of yoga, different levels of intellect and bhakti kind of pose against each other, and he also saw science kind of at loggerheads the science of the day with the 7-day creation theory. So it was a kind of interesting time. You used words like fomenting, a culture that's fomenting and beginning to rub against these principles and conjure up something, bring something up that might act as a sort of knowledge for them, a sort of basis to understand. So for those people who have been seeking for explanations to what they feel intuitively, or maybe they've had past lifetimes where meditation has been a part of their life and their culture, because how many lifetimes could you have had in America by the time Swamiji was there? It wasn't long since the Boston Tea Party was hardly done and over with, so there was still a very, very young culture, as we are even today. And that's why we probably good for us to take recourse to these systems, these dharmic systems, because it will fill in some of this desire, this thirst for esoteric answers, or questions to answers to questions that science and fundamentalist religion aren't answering, and maybe even just vague references to it in religion, like heaven, where your ancestors went, but there's no real defining place there beyond heaven, or non-duality, or formlessness, or emptiness, or words like that, which probably wouldn't be interesting to a culture that's pretty much absent of a monastic community. Not very many monasteries or people retiring from the world. And certainly not a lot of luminaries like seers and rishis that for hundreds and thousands of years had been meditating on these deep systems and actually putting them into words and bringing them forth to teach their children over generations. So all of that is a kind of semi-historical look at something that's eternal and timeless, brings us to a sort of pleasant surprise if you read the Gita and you come upon chapter 10 and chapter 11 too, which has the divine eye in it, because Sri Krishna gives Arjuna a touch and gives him a divine eye. So in several chapters of the Gita, the Jnana Chakshu is mentioned. And if you come upon that in a scripture like that and you're very interested and you have nowhere to go with it in your own culture or your own upbringing, then you're going to have to be satisfied to say that there was a culture somewhere that gave rise to such an idea, or if you want, a principle. And then you'd be led towards a system like Kundalini Yoga. And you'd find out that there were 7 such centers. And you'd try and navigate them. Maybe you'd try and figure out, as I was saying last week, which center am I at right now? Or how can I awaken this power that Sri Ramakrishna talks about in the Gospel of Ramakrishna? Our real Kundalini master really was in Sri Ramakrishna in the 1800s. The world's recent and most current Kundalini master was there in the form of that great avatar of Kali. Why not? Because Kali is that same Kundalini Shakti that's rising. And people are looking for her to rise when they do these certain practices. A Kundalini teacher who was worth his snuff and knew his material would say, "Have you uncoiled your spring yet?" would be how they would put it. And the practitioner would say, "What do you mean, sir?" He says, "Because she's coiled, in the base of the spine. And by certain practices that you'll release her, and it's like a spring, like this." And that's exactly the image of the 3 main nadis, the Sushumna, the Ida, and the Pingala. The Ida and the Pingala go like this up the central channel. So it's like a spring that's been coiled and then all of a sudden released by certain practices. And the evidence is that these beings feel her release in the form of deeper knowledge, bliss, refined emotions like devotion and so forth, inner knowing, omniscience, omnipresence, omnipotence, the 3 ohms I like to call them. So all of these things are visited upon the practitioner time and time again, who is constantly working on, if you want to put it in just today's words, keeping your consciousness balanced and buoyant. Sri Ramakrishna talked about the hot air balloon. If you can keep that, throw the sandbags of lust and anger and greed and envy and jealousy and fear and pride and all these things, shame, grief, if those sandbags can get ousted out of the balloon of the carriage of your mind, you see, the basket of your mind, and then that hot air balloon will just naturally rise. And that's the experience of people then who as we say in Vedanta, pratipakya bhavanam, who water the flowers and not the weeds. So there's a great part of the spiritual battle in the beginning has to do with taking the mind off of what's not real and placing it on what's real. And since Brahman is the only reality, then in a sense, Danu Grahit from Upanishada Mahastram, you take a bow and you aim it at the target and you fill it with the arrow of mind and you release it and you penetrate the mark. It's not that difficult to miss Brahman, even if you're not a very good archer. Brahman is everywhere, so anywhere you shoot the arrow is going to hit the target. So you have to take that kind of stance when you're a beginning practitioner and open yourself up to the evidence of hundreds and thousands of years of beings who have had direct spiritual experience of God, Brahman, Allah, Almighty Father, Great Spirit, however you want to call that great being, that all-pervasive great being, who, yes, is nameless, formless, timeless, birthless, deathless, full of bliss, Sat Chit Ananda, Sat Chid Ananda, sometimes say, existence, knowledge and bliss, all to the nth degree or to the infinite. So you can even have many grand names, monikers for that one divine principle. We chanted that this morning at meditation. Indram Mitram Matarato Divyaha Sasuparna Garutman. Garutman is Garuda, who carries this prana. Ekam Sat Vipra Bahuda Vedantyagnin. The fire of Vedanta is there in Ekam Sat Vipra. There's one great reality and many paths leading to it. Yaman Matarish Vanamahu. Even the Mahat, is in on this. So the god of fire, Agni, the god of the carrier of the consciousness, the winged carrier of consciousness, it's called Garutman, Garuda, and Indram, the god of gods, Varuna, the god of the elements. All of these beings are in on this great secret of spiritual awakening and the adventure of consciousness, we were calling it last week. So in this second week, in the second installment of Jnana Chakshu, or the third eye, sometimes affectionately called, we will look at some of the other religions, the way they looked at it, but we want to stay right now inside of India for a second and look at these 7 systems I found that I'm saying here, I'm proposing, might just be considered to be that Kundalini Shakti system as it was explained by rishis in various time periods of India. This is all inside of India now. So let's go across the top first. Let's look at some of these great beings. First you had Patanjali talking about 7. Patanjali is who? The father of Patanjala, or the 8-limbed yoga, the authentic yoga, not what we're mistaking for yoga today in the West and generally now even in India and the world, is trying to dumb it all down or relegate it to hatha only or physical only. That's probably somewhat natural for people who aren't aware of Kundalini Shakti to do so, to think of in terms of everything as matter, especially when science is really kind of across-the-board religion of the world today. They're materialists. So in that case, then, there is an eight-limbed yoga that avers differently. So basically, you've got many different elements to your being here. You've got physical, but yes, you've got emotional, you've got psychical, you've got intellectual, you've got philosophical, you've got spiritual. And did I leave any out? So there are many different levels of your being that each need to be fed, each need to be filled, each need to become aware and opening, you see. I mean, even what I just said, if you were somewhat flexible or facile with your thinking, you could say, well, the physical and the emotional, couldn't I pretty much assign those to these first three lower chakras? Maybe even the psychical. See, like psychic consciousness. There's a lot of beings attracted to occult powers, so they're going to their ancestors, coming back to the world to do what? The very first occult power of the 8 occult powers in India is domination. So if you have that, a desire for that, you go to your ancestors, you come back to control the world. See, has anyone ever done it? The English came fairly close recently, the Romans before them. So there are these beings that come back to try, and they use this power of domination. So, and you maybe anyone who's taking a body is kind of trying to dominate their own little place in the chain of existence, in the three worlds. So you could, what I'm saying here is you could invent a seven-tiered system right now with the fact that you have physical consciousness, you have emotional consciousness, you have psychical consciousness, and you have mental consciousness, philosophical consciousness, intellectual consciousness. So you could see then basically how they would put together systems like this. So Patanjali was very recent, really, according to India's time frame. 140 AD was that manifestation. That was his particular incarnation, because he was born 500 years or so later as Gaudapada's student and was Shankara's teacher. A lot of people don't know that. So each lifetime to lifetime, these great souls come, and they're talking about these different systems. So he's talking about, in yoga was his main thing, how to systematize yoga. You can see his fold system there. Then Vedavyas comes next, across the top. He's the father of Vedanta. So you have the father of yoga and the father of Vedanta, and he had a 7-tiered system he talked about or commented on. Vishishta, much more ancient than those two, comes next. Then Sri Krishna, and how he mentions it in the Gita. Then Lord Buddha, and how it falls in the Buddhist system. And then finally yoga overall, kind of an integrational yoga. And then Kapila even had a 7-tiered system that he looked at. And he was very early on too, and influenced all the rest. Probably very hard to find out who was earlier, Lord Kapila or Lord Kapila. But we know that Krishna was very early too, and we also know that Patanjali was later, so was Lord Buddha. Lord Buddha being maybe 600 or so years before the father of yoga came. And Vedavyas after Patanjali. So you could say that there are good, like 500-year steps here, 5-century steps between these beings, sometimes more. And my point in drawing all this together was they each had a 7-tiered system. And since we're studying Kundalini Yoga, whose founder we don't know who it was, can't assign a name to that system, but we know that it's shared by Vedanta and Tantra both, so it was probably contributed to by great beings like this. But just as a matter of interest, let's look at Patanjali. And so the first level is awakening of consciousness. Vyuntana Chitta, he called it. The second level, and think about the chakras now as we're going through these. Nirodha Chitta, controlling your consciousness. Then Nirmana Chitta, individual consciousness. Does it sound like maybe the three systems? It sounds a lot like the 7 stages of knowledge to me. Prashanta Chitta is next, tranquil consciousness. Ekagrita Chitta is next, attentive awareness. Chidra Chitta, purified consciousness. And then Paripakva Chitta, pure consciousness. So Father of Yoga is thinking what? You can see here, even by the English, all in terms of these 2 words, either consciousness or awareness, take your pick. Those have been what the Vedantists and the Buddhists of modern times have chosen out of India to explain this inexplicable, non-vibrational highest state of awareness, like Sahasrara Chakra. So awareness, pure conscious awareness, timeless, deathless consciousness. Our own founder, Lex Sixon here, used those terms when, in the early days when we were all in our 20s and 30s, very much attached to the Indian Dharma and trying to go deeper with it. Vedavyas puts it this way. He puts it in terms of Paragyata Pragya, true knowledge, is the first level. The second level of 7 is Heyakshina Pragya, renunciation. Prapya Prapti Pragya is attainment. Then Karya Shuddhi Pragya is accomplishment. Charita Dikara Pragya is realization. Gunatita Pragya is untainted intelligence, that is beyond the gunas. And then finally Swarupa Matra Jyoti, self-illumined consciousness. Swarupa Matra Jyoti, that's the light of mother, you might say. So you can see some, again, 500 or more years between the time of yoga and Vedanta, as far as their founders in this particular day and age, how they were looking in terms of 7 levels of knowledge, or 7 chakras, or 7 states of awareness, however you're going to want to look at that. 500 years may not sound like a lot, and it's not a lot in India, as far as philosophically speaking goes, but it's a long time for human beings here on Earth, in which you could have some 5 or 6 lifetimes, or more. Let's look at the ancient Lord Vashishta, the mind-born son of the Trinity, Lord Brahma. He puts it in terms of Subhecha, which means you start with right desire. Second level is Vicharna, right reflection. Tanu Manasa, then the mind dissolves, or it acquires the ability to dissolve and reform itself consciously. Sattvapati, self-realization, dawns. One of Vashishta's favorite ways of talking about the dissolution of conditioned consciousness. Asam Shakti is non-attachment, then Padarthabhavana, transcendence, and Turiya, beyond knowledge. Some of that might be familiar to all of you because we've studied that specifically in the 7 stages of knowledge that Lord Vashishta taught to the young avatar, Sri Ram, in that famous scripture, Yoga Vashishta. Let's look at Krishna's recounting of 7 levels. Remember, I'm comparing these generally across the board with the 7 chakras, which talking about if you have the consciousness has risen to the 6th chakra, which is called the Ajna Chakra, or the Jnana Chakshu, or the third eye, then you would have worked your way through 6 other stages, or 5 other stages, in order to possess this higher knowledge and know it without a doubt to be the truth. And if you know the truth shall set you free. Isn't it true? So this is what they're considering levels of knowledge leading to the highest truth in these days, in these past times. Krishna puts it in his usual very accessible way, antaha jnana, inner knowledge. That means you don't necessarily go looking for inner knowledge, it's already there. So you think of it as being inherent in you. That also is very, very yogic, as far as the 7 stages of yoga. All knowledge lies within you, is how that's put. or the kingdoms of heaven lie within you is another way you could say that. Dukkha samyoga viyogam is the elimination of pain. Krishna talks about that in the Gita. That's desirable in both, in all yogas, to not just put up with pain. It awakens you first. It's probably a better wake-up call than pleasure is, because pleasure tends to hypnotize you into rounds of more of the same, but pain tends to want to develop detachment from both pleasure and pain, because eventually you realize that the two are same faces of the same coin. Two faces of the same coin. You're going, first you're trying to escape pain by getting pleasure, and then you realize that you're just led back to pain again. And as soon as you realize this duality, which Krishna calls dvandva mohena, a deluding pair of opposite, like sukha and dukkha, because he's using that here, dukkha samyoga viyogam, then you'll withdraw from both dualities, and naturally you'll be led towards a non-dual kind of state or thinking. Your mind, and you can look back at the one just before it, once you start to have right reflection, you see, and once you want to renounce maybe the dualities and control your consciousness, you can, if you look across the board and don't just let the last three systems go just because you're looking at the fourth one, but try and make the connections, and then you can see how these thinkers were very much on board with one another, concurring with each other. They conferred so they could concur. So, and then these systems were born, and based on past knowledge, they stayed for thousands of years in place, so that we can be recalling them, all 7 of them, right now in so-called modern times. Taking a little bit more time on Krishna's because it's so accessible. Then he calls it, the next stage, samadhi sampadanam, attaining samadhi. And then samyak darshanam, perfect vision. That's almost straight across from Lord Buddha's Eightfold Path. Then nityamukta, absolute freedom. Then Trigunatitatvam, dissolving the gunas. And finally, Brahmanishta, immersion in Brahman. So Krishna, you could see, very much sounds like a combination of yoga and Vedanta to me. And of course he was earlier than the father of yoga by many, many centuries, if not millennia, and earlier than Vedavyasa's Vedanta at the time too. Let's look at Buddha, since we're going through this quickly, where if you have this eye of wisdom, then these 7 systems are not unknown to you, no matter what age you lived in. And you're not deluded, as I chanted at the beginning of the class, when the Lord departs, stays, and enjoys. As he mans the 5 senses and gives them up. He mans the body and gives them up. Mans the mind, takes over the mind and intellect and gives them up. Then people think, oh, in a deluded way, you see, it's coming, it's going, I can't figure it out, where is it? I can't put my finger on it. I can't build my house on bedrock then. You see, it's all shifting sands to me. But they know that when this appearance of coming and going is happening in front of their senses, whether it be the gross senses in waking state or the subtle senses in dream, they know there's a solid principle underlying it all, an eternal, unmoving substratum, because they've opened up this eye of wisdom. And whichever way they did it in whichever age, some great soul came along and told them, here it is again, here it is again, here it is again. There are 7 worlds. And we'll look at that next. Let's look at Lord Buddha's, and this will be familiar to you. Perfect view, perfect resolve, perfect speech, perfect conduct, perfect livelihood, perfect effort, perfect mindfulness, and perfect concentration. Well, I threw 8 at you there, but I couldn't resist the temptation. Because it's it's very, very important to look at Lord Buddha and Buddhism in this day and age. It's also been one of the religions from the East that has penetrated a little deeper into Western thinking than most of the other ones have. Because yoga is not itself here. It's just physical. And Vedanta is a new kid on the block. Neo-Vedanta, we call it. We'll probably have to wait for some centuries for that to have its rise and its presiding. So then let's look at yoga overall. Yoga talks about samyak jnana. There's a wisdom transmission that needs to happen. Then you get khyati, discernment and clarity. When you get that clarity, the rain cloud of virtues rises in you. Then there's destruction of blemishes, then dispassion towards the gunas, then destruction of karma and obstacles, and finally the attainment of non-dual samadhi. So these are 7 levels of yoga which are known there and by which the soul can proceed. Every one of them worthy of meditating upon and considering. Each one of them is very powerful. Looking back, maybe earliest of all, maybe discounting Lord Vasishta's time, but Lord Kapila, the Samkhya system, very early on, talks about gaining the 5 preliminary perfections. So he's talking about it in terms of selecting and contemplating a spiritual path, which is what I just mentioned we're doing. Swadharma. Then take recourse to Guru and scriptures. And then reflect, manana. And that carried on for centuries and centuries into the Vedanta fold too, that manana was a very important thing to do. As I've said before, you put food in your body and then you get the nutrients out of it. Well, you should do the same with putting food into your mind and not just let it sit there and give you a constipated mind. You should have a flowing mind where this knowledge is living and flexible, and that can be done if you contemplate or use manana. Manana, just the mind's contemplation on the knowledge and that you're taking in from these great souls. Then you say sadhu satsanga comes. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, true. Holy company, very important. Then manaha shuddhi, self-purification, and trividam dukkam, removal of the 3 types of pain. If we look back, we saw that destruction of pain was important also to Lord Krishna in the Gita, and also to Patanjali. He talks about it in yoga. And so you could say when you look at this, there are 7. Contemplating a path, recourse to the Guru, inner reflection, holy company, self-purification, removal of the 3 types of pain. So, therefore, we refer to this, whether it's a 7 or an 8 system, most of these are 7, and you can see how they, through the ages, have influenced us. So, maybe a little bit too quick a review of all of this, but it is given in comparison to the Kundalini Yoga 7 chakras that we're looking at, to see how prevalent these kinds of 7-tiered systems have been throughout India's history. And so Kundalini Yoga could have influenced that or been influenced by them over time, as the rishis conferred with one another over time and looked at these systems. So it's a quick read in this case, but let's finish with the quote on the bottom. The 7 states of knowledge all overlap, have countless ramifications, and each of those is divided into 100-fold. Upon coursing through these 7 stages, all visible things become empty and past resurrection. The result is Jivan Mukti, a state of pure being. These stages of higher knowledge make one a living, liberated being then, perfectly free whether abiding as a householder or as an ascetic. And then an analogy here. The earth moves, causing the illusion of the movement of the sun, but the sun does not move. Just so, nature, or Maya, is moving, changing, unfolding veil after veil, turning over leaf after leaf of this grand book called life, while the witnessing soul drinks in knowledge in stages, unmoved and unchanged. So it's a good description again of your witness consciousness, Sakshi Bhutam, or your Atman, watching, no matter what stage consciousness is moving to, or what tattva it's moving through, which sense it's occupying in any given activity that it's undertaking. The witness is always there watching, so that's very beautifully said. And this is actually, this quote I put together, a combination of 3 different rishis who gave these 7 systems across the top. And of course at the end we can recognize Swami Vivekananda's words about the appearance of the movement of the sun, but how in nature and Maya it's all apparent movement, and the soul witnesses. As it does, it should drink in this knowledge, and maybe it should know that it's in 7 different levels, that it can drink that in. And of course there's that inevitable mention of Jivan Mukta, which Shankar himself, whose system is not up here, but you could probably say represented by Vedavyas when he goes Satsangatve nisangatvam, nisangatve nirmohatvam, nirmohatve nischalitatvam, nischalitatve jivanamukti. Bhaja Govindam, Bhaja Govindam, Bhaja Govindam mudamate, samprapte sanihite kare, nahi nahi rakshati dukrin karane. Bhaja Govindam, Bhaja Govindam, Bhaja Govindam mudamate, samprapte sanihite kare, nahi nahi rakshati dukrin karane. Bhaja Govinda. 2 verses out of that epic masterpiece. Stotram we call it, or even a bhajan, but what it's saying there is satsang gatve nisangatvam, from satsang gatve, from holy company, see, which is mentioned right here. Comes freedom from delusion, nirmohatvam. Nir means extinction of, moha means delusion. And from nirmohatvam comes nischalitatvam. Nischala, or nischaya, is steadiness, really. So you get steadiness after delusion has been removed. And then from steadiness you get jivan mukti, living liberation in this life. Nischalitatvam jivan mukti. So that's why it's always brought up. My teacher brought it up many, many times in his talks. At least that word crossed his lips 3 or 4 times in every discourse I ever heard him give in the Vedanta societies. Jivan mukti. He wanted the West to produce a jivan mukta. I'm waiting, come on. A jivan mukta, or for us to attain jivan mukti. So you might say that could be approached. If you possess the third eye of wisdom, it might be yours already, depending on how adept you are at manning the third eye. And we'll look at that in a second. Beings that are very have great ability in that way. While we're still on the 7-tiered systems, then I want to show you this chart, which has a newly colorized, the 7 spheres, 7 worlds, 7 chakras, and 5 koshas. So now we can bring in, by proximity, close proximity, the 7 chakras and look at them. But we can also make it a little bit more personalized by showing the beings and the worlds that they go to. Because these are, that we just went through, are definitely 7 stages of knowledge. It would be nice if we thought of those as worlds, because all our knowledge here is a world inside itself. You can get knowledge of biology, or knowledge of chemistry, or knowledge of anything, forestry, or weather, or viruses, which everyone's thinking about right now. You can get knowledge of everything, and they're all a kind of a world inside of themselves. So if you're too attached to the physical, then the causes of these things aren't going to be open to you and known by you. You'll be measuring basically by an outer instrument all the time, which are the 5 senses. But if you started to look at things in the way the rishis looked at them, as lower to middling to higher levels, like the 4 stages of the word. Everything comes out of supreme state, which is formless, suggests ideas next. That's called pashanti. Then comes down to putting together everything in the mind, ideas, words, knowledge, vibration, light, intelligence, pulls all those together into subtle worlds, and finally down to the lowest state or grossest states of Vaikari, which is this physical world. Everything is taken from grand ideas and concretized into objects. Holy Mother used to say that all the time. You look at the object, it's just mind made manifest, she said. All objects came out of your own mind is where she's going with that. So the mind has then access to these higher levels of knowledge, whether you want to put it in the sense of what I was saying earlier. You have physical, you have emotional, and you have mental, and you have psychic, and you have intellectual, and you have philosophical, and you have spiritual levels of your being. And that's almost a 7-tiered system right there that your consciousness can move between. If you really want to put it more simply, then you go Advaitic on the whole thing and say waking, dreaming, and deep sleep, and you spread the 7 out over that. But don't forget to include Turiya, because he did. He puts it in terms of Turiya Tita, or beyond the Gunas. So if you, this is actually my segue into the idea that there are beings in these worlds. So this makes it more personalized for you. So across the top there, we see another line of things to consider. Tattvas, which are principles, physical, mental, intellectual principles inside of you. Sheaths, or coverings, or koshas they're called. Spheres, or they're also called brahmandas, worlds. And dvipas and vortexes, or chakras. So maybe we want to look first just to remind ourselves of the 7 chakras over at the far right of this chart, your far right. You can see there it's the Muladhara, and then the Svadhisthana, if we're going from bottom to top, of course. Muladhara is the root chakra. Svadhisthana is the 2nd chakra. Manipura is the 3rd chakra. And then you have Anahata at the heart, Vishuddha at the throat, symbolically speaking, of course. Agya at the 3rd eye, so there's your wisdom eye, or your Jnana Chakshu, as we chanted at the beginning of class. And then Sahasrara, the 1,000-petaled lotus. While we're there, and so we keep our mind freshly on this system, let's see what the English on the side of those have to tell us. At the Muladhara level of root chakra, base chakra, they align it with the base of the spine, using physically the body as a template. It says, those with sinful karmas gravitate to the 7 lower worlds as ghosts and asuras, eventually gaining a chance for a physical birth again. So the Muladhara chakra has a passageway into hell. And hell can be, of course, defined in a much vaster and wider sense than it has been to us in Christendom, fundamentalist Christianity, where devils and hellfires and so forth are going on. But that's the advantage of looking at all worlds inside the mind, because the body returns to the 5 elements at the end, so it's not going to go to any hell or any heaven. So there must be something else that's transmigrating. And so that transmigrating has to be a subtle form in your mind, your dream form, if you want to put it that way. So you can have bad dreams and good dreams. So heavens or hells are back there in your mind. And they're also even gradated here. We'll look at some of them, because remember the dotted red line here now has to do with a granthi, a knot. We'll look at that after the break. That falls, one of the granthis falls between the third chakra, Manipura, and the heart chakra. So these beings who are falling into lower realms of dream lifetimes, dream streams of consciousness that are falling into lower births, as Krishna mentions in the Gita, even with animals, although some of them are living hellish lives, but others are, for animal existence, probably living pretty good lives. Like our cows here on the Big Island have plenty to eat. Of course, they're headed for butchers and meat racks, of course, which is not a good thing. But the idea here being then, if you were to raise your consciousness, or this Kundalini Shakti, if you were to open yourself up to her suggestion, her influence, by doing spiritual practices prescribed by the Kundalini Yoga system, like in the Yoga Kundalini Upanishad or the Tantras, that consciousness would reach a place where it's having higher and higher births, to quote Sri Aurobindo, and more blissful births, more peaceful births. So there are people in this world who have those higher and blissful lifetimes. I've met some of them in my lifetime, and they're not the ones right now running in fear and because of some virus that's come upon us, the next wave of media-inspired fear, if you want to call it that. So they're steady no matter what the situation is, and they will be that way no matter what happens. If there's a yogi living next door to you and you're hungry because there's no food on the shelves in the stores, you walk over to him and say, "I'm really hungry." And he said, "Why?" You ask him, "Well, why aren't you hungry?" "Because I don't usually eat." So he's got some yogic prowess there. He hardly eats during the day, maybe takes a few morsels of food later to keep his body alive, and he's meditating and he's peaceful. He's not dependent on anything. People overlook that too easily. They poo-poo it too easily. Yogic powers, Dharma, teachings, that's the solution for embodiment. It's called, shall we sing it again? Jivan Mukti. And why isn't that the goal of people? It's certainly a goal of hundreds and thousands of monks who want to reach enlightenment. And in every tradition, there's monastic communities that quit the world because of that. And then there's those people who are in the business of making children. And hopefully they will get the teachings and give them to their children so that monks can be born to convince us that we don't need to be children anymore. We can be mature spiritual adults with consciousness at higher centers, like the yogi next door, who doesn't need to worry about scarcity of food or some germ heading his way. Can meditate it away. Now, it's only got a 12 or 20 year shelf life. 12 or 20 hour shelf life, I hear, so meditate it away, see. Wait it out. Why be in fear of death? Because death is an illusion. So these are the thoughts that are occupying people at a consciousness level which is above the heart, you see. Let's read on up, because there is Atala, Vitala, Sutala, Talatala, Mahatala, Rasatala, and Patala. Patala is, if you want to give a good definition for it in English, it's called sunken ground. The patalas are sunken grounds. That means a sunken level of consciousness where people have let their minds go, where depression is with them all the time, and pain and suffering, which are things that you wanted to eliminate, right? If you went higher in your consciousness, you found out you could eliminate them, but instead you've let them take over your life so that you are depressed. You might as well be depression. And solutions out there that are proposed are not helping you. So you need to awaken your consciousness, because she is in your consciousness, and she will take you up and out of the three worlds of suffering. May peace be unto them all. Shanti, 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 we say. If you graduate one center, as far as philosophical understanding goes, you're at the svadhisthana, the organs of procreation, you might say, are the allocation, the level that's with, physically speaking. So it says there, transmigrating minds attached to the earth revolve between the first three worlds. So this is back and forth from lower chakra to second chakra living. And it's a good definition for that is the word transmigration. That's something that isn't very well understood in America or in the English language. There's a word called transmigration. We should probably be studying words like transformation, transcendence. The few trans words we should probably get out of our vocabulary, but there's a couple that are really important, and one of them is transmigrating. Because then you'll understand the birth-death syndrome, the wheel of birth and death. What Swami Vivekananda talked about here when he talked about Maya and nature changing all the time, but the witness looking on. The witness would be looking on then from a higher center. But first, through the ancestors, the Manipura is usually seen right there at the third chakra, at the pit of the gut, or the stomach, physically speaking. It says here, pious people with unfulfilled desires arrive at the Svarloka and get reborn on earth to fulfill them. So if you look across the board, he's referring to the Svarloka here. We'll look at that in a second. So Bur, Bhuva, Swaha, you see, or Svar, you'd probably recognize that from your Gayatri mantra. So they've been thinking about the three worlds of transmigration forever in India, because that's where billions of souls collect and transmigrate through. And there doesn't seem to be any change going on there. How many Jivan Muktas are being developed in any given cycle of transmigration through the three worlds? Who knows? Who has the count? Who has the counter for that? Lord Brahma or Yama? We'll have to go borrow it from one of them. Either the god of creation or the god of death knows that number. See? And in the meantime, we just know, as we'll see soon, that there are lots of nadis running through the seven chakras, channels without end. And just like there are, as I said last week, many, many jet airlines flying into New York airports, and many, many roads leading to the cities and so forth, there are also many, many roads inside of you that are conducting the energy of Garuda, the carrier of consciousness, that take your transmigrating soul from world to world in your mind as a dream. This is a dream right here. See, you should wake up from this dream as soon as you can too. And that, Ramana Maharshi said that, right? Dream number 1 and dream number 2, waking and dreaming states, are two different kinds of dream. So pious people reach that Manipura chakra. Probably you have higher and lower ancestors there. And if they aren't able to penetrate this Vishnu Granti is the word we'll look at after the break, then they get bounced back. It's like an elastic, subtle nerve, you see, or subtle rope, you see, net. They just get bounced back to transmigration again and again. But there is a way in which you can transcend the thirst for things of the three worlds. We were talking about that word today, Trishna, when we were driving. Thirst, hunger, thirst, and thirst could be anything from liquids to thirst for rebirth. One of the nidanas of Buddhism is Trishna, the thirst to be reborn again and again. And that's with desire, by the way, because desire would have to be there. But if desire gets worked out, then you would penetrate through to the Anahata Chakra, and that's where you might say 3 below, 3 above. That heart chakra is more important, but probably less peopled than the chakra preceding it. Manipura chakra is heavily, heavily trafficked with souls wanting to get in and out of bodies and go back to earth and so forth. And some souls wanting to get beyond the 3 worlds, who have this desire for Jivan Mukta, or have this desire for enlightenment, as we say. So there you see at the Anahata level, the English says, beings possessed of love, nonviolence, equanimity, and virtue rise easily to the higher causal realms. They transcend rebirth in the physical, astral, and celestial worlds. So easily is a nice word to think of there. You should think of that in your meditations, like the hot air balloon. I'll just throw these sandbags of what happened to me today at work, or at school, or at the quarantine center, or wherever you are. I should throw these sandbags out in my daily meditation. They're not real, they'll pass, they change, it's not going to last, and so forth and so on. Everything here is ephemeral. Only the one unchanging Brahman is real, and I am that. Maybe we ought to just write that down and run it across the screen right now. It's just what I said. Water the flowers, not the weeds. And therefore, experience peace of mind again. Not that you should have ever left it before, or let it get away from you, because you need peace of mind first and foremost. So that's a nice English definition there, because if you were able to get beyond the 3rd chakra, 3 worlds, then you would need to be possessed of love, nonviolence, equanimity, and virtue. And we can see that things like the rain cloud of virtues here that we looked at are very important to the 7-tiered system of yoga, for instance. Then there's the Vishuddha chakra at the heart. We're good review right now because we maybe confused ourselves a lot with this chart. See, there was too much information in too short a time. I'm just giving it quickly so you can see throughout India how many 7 systems there are. Now, thankfully, we're coming back to this more, I wouldn't say popular, but more well-known system of Kundalini Yoga that didn't really get a fair shake either in the 60s when it was brought here by opportunists, spiritual materialists they called them back in the 60s, and wasn't given to us by authentic teachers. But you can read the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, and again, that Kundalini master will tell you the entire score, some of which we'll have next week and the 4th week, some of those teachings of Sri Ramakrishna. The Vishuddha chakra then is there at the throat, and beings possessed, we're going upwards towards the throat and the 3rd eye. So we kind of take them together at the center of speaking and understanding wisdom, and the center of approaching non-duality, the wisdom eye they call it, Jnana Chakshu. The assignment there in English is, those souls nearly free of all desire for the realms of embodiment go quickly to the higher worlds, there to merge with Brahman in due time. That we would understand the due time part of it when we look at the 7 worlds. Here, we'll look at them in a minute, because it's there at the realm of the Tapaloka and Brahmaloka, which you're approaching the Trinity, or the great conscious principles of Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva. Call them Ishvara, or Avatar, or Chosen Ideal, Ishtam. Beings who are rising inward ascension, we call it, into their own consciousness, having access and communion with, it's called darshan in Sanskrit, communion with these great beings. So you can be accomplishing all this while you're still in the physical body. That's something that has to be said. Just because you go beyond your ancestors and get to the heart chakra doesn't necessarily mean that you've given up your physical body. That's particularly the case with people who are adept already at this latter seven-tiered ladder, and people who are first experiencing these higher worlds in a series of lifetimes. And they both will have to keep the physical body for different reasons, but it's not like you're thinking of, I have to die in order to get enlightenment. Jivan Mukta is, as we look back on it, a living, liberated condition. You're still in the body as you experience it. And thankfully, as well, because these beings then were able to give the physical world this transmission. Isn't it the very first thing, transmission of knowledge, that yoga talks about? You need samyak jnana. One of my friends once said, when I come back here, if I have to come back again, I want dharmic parents. So I'm going to ask the Lord, if I'm reborn again in the physical earth after this, dharmic parents, because they're going to give me the wisdom transmission. I said, well, you better not be born in America then, because we never got it from our parents as we grew up. Maybe more and more we will, if we can get this wisdom available to us. And again, entertain it and digest it, hold it, manana, in our minds long enough, so that it can become a part of our lives, our samskaras, and will attract children to us who are interested in that. So that's one of the things that these souls are wanting to have. That's why they go beyond the three worlds. So what else to say here but that at the Sahasrara Chakra, illumined souls transcend the Brahmaloka and merged with Brahman. So since we went up the seven chakras, let's go down the seven worlds. Brahmaloka was just mentioned, so it's a realm of the sacred Trinity. So what could you say about it from the non-dual perspective? It has form. So if you're seeking formlessness, and there are a number of souls in any given cycle who are, then it's probably not going to satisfy you. You know, nice place to visit, I wouldn't want to live there, kind of thing, because I'm headed for the seventh chakra. I want absolute freedom. I want to know what Brahman is like. I want to merge with Brahman. We just said that there are beings who want to merge with Brahman. Beings who do not hold that idea yet, they can stay at that loka, or even other lokas. But you can see even the next loka down, tapar loka, which if you want to put it across the board with the Ajna Chakra, the third eye, is a realm of austerity. Tapas means austerity. So these are beings that, of course, do not desire anything in the three worlds. We have to keep that in mind when you study this. Oh, it's tapar loka, you know, let's go there, it's real high. How is it real high? It's so high that you can't see anything anymore. It's like going up in the sky in a hot air balloon. Everything disappears down there. So, I mean, how can you explain the bliss of being high in a hot air balloon? So you just see clouds. That's all you see. Why is that so blissful? Why is it so peaceful? See, what is the aesthetic value of it? How can you define it in words? Because everything else shrunk away, and you realize that none of that exists anymore. You see yourself. So you don't want to X that out of the equation. See that the Atman, the witness, is now there with its eye totally open. Which eye? It's one eye. Because beings with two eyes are being deluded down on earth, down in the three worlds. But being with this single eye open are not deluded here. They're still giving you the wisdom transmission. And with all these concomitants that go with it. And we'll look at those as far as tattvas, you see next. But coming down from, if you want to just put a transparency over this, that this is the Sahasrara Chakra and this is the Ajna Chakra, you come down to the throat chakra and you've got Jnanaloka, realm of the seers. Why is there a realm of the seers? Because some beings do not want to merge in Brahman to prove anything. They already know Brahman. They want to hold a subtle body or a causal body so that they can work with beings below the line, see, below the Vishnu Granthi. They know there are souls who are pious, who are trying to get through that elastic membrane, that subtle elastic membrane of consciousness. The curtain of nescience. That's why I composed a chart called the curtain of nescience and showed you basically what it consists of. If there's a membrane there and I bumped up against it, I would find out that it's made of fear, doubt, belief in duality, and other such things. And that these were at a very primal level. My fear would be that I'm afraid to go beyond the three worlds because I still have some desire for them. I still think that the physical body is all there is, and I still want to go down and use my lungs and my tongue and my ears to hear sweet music and my eyes to see desirable things. And I have a fear of giving those up. It's primal in me, see. So Jivan Mukta, these are very adept and powerful souls with lots of inner strength, virya. They have powerful, they're like Hanuman, that they would be able to pierce through in both directions the curtain of nescience. Oh, I got beyond my ancestors. Well, good for you. Now can you go back to them? Would be what a Vivekananda might ask you. Can you penetrate in reverse form back to the three worlds and come through again and go through back again and come again? That takes a lot of determination, a lot of resolve, and a lot of inner strength. You just do it once and you're free, good for you. But will you be pulled back again by these desires? Or did you really get free? What is freedom? Moksha. You've got to look at the seventh level of every one of these to find out how they've explained what freedom was to them. So that's why there's a realm of the seers, so that we can take recourse to them in many ways. Then the fourth chakra, heart, we're putting that across the board with the Maharloka, realm of the sages. Hard to describe these, but you might say that's where the Mahat, or Indra, the god of gods, are dancing with their beloved devotees. And the heart chakra, of course, also a lot of things to say about it, but unlike the Taparloka where you don't have many things to say about it, and all of them good, at this chakra you have lots of things to say about it, and all of them are good too. Now coming back down again into the three worlds, there's Svarloka, realm of Indra and the gods, I just said. So then Bhuvarloka, realm of the Munis and the Siddhis, which, by the way, are not very high in consciousness. There are words used there. And Burloka, the realm of the humans and animals, and insects and plants and so forth. So these three realms, these three worlds, known as the three worlds, which are in our Gayatri mantra, Bhur, Bhuva, Swaha, are in need of help. They're in need of peace, peace, peace. That's why we end all of our mantras with that, Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Really, anywhere above these three worlds is not in need of peace. They already have it. And they were seeking it, and they probably attained it here, and then able to translate it into pure gold of their consciousness and penetrate through the Vishnu Granthi, which again we'll look at after the break. Now let's look at another system next to it on the right. Here's the way a tantric system I found, which is actually was not very well known. Puts it in terms of Jambu Dvipa, Shaka Dvipa, Kusha Dvipa, Krancha Dvipa, Shalmali Dvipa, Plaksa Dvipa, and Pushkar Dvipa. So physical world, ethereal astral world, and celestial world. You can see this soul about ready to enter in, through those doorways into these different worlds. Still desiring objects of desire, whether they be physical, how did it say here, astral or celestial. And you must look back to that old teaching, is that if you have good karmas that you've developed at these worlds that you've embodied at, you've been a good person and so forth, that those are credit merits, as Holy Mother called them, and that when you go to heaven they get used up. And that's what puts you back down to earth, because you're still caught in this revolving wheel of good and bad. Good and bad. And, of course, mixed, of course. And these things are taking away your clarity. You see, right reflection, right resolve, and kyati, your discernment and clarity. They're taking this away, these kinds of experiences. So then you're going to have to look beyond these three worlds in this designation called dvipa, and get beyond what is physical, astral, and celestial. That's kind of a rare soul in today's Kali Yuga, we call it, that is able to think beyond the box in that way. Most people can't even think beyond this box yet. See, the physical world with five senses. Even intelligent people here, scientists and so forth, are still caught in that box. They're not entertaining or open to these inner worlds and where they go tonight and dream and so forth. And even intelligent Western physicists and psychologists are not entertaining other lifetimes and other worlds that you go, or maybe even looking at these states of your consciousness that change, that take the soul without killing it to different levels of consciousness. It can come back again, whether it went to hell or whether it went to Jivan Mukta. It can come back again. It moves, it doesn't move. When it moves, it doesn't cause any change in it. It's a movement of your consciousness to different realms that were projected by your mind, by the minds of billions of beings and gods and so forth, like Indra. But there you are, bouncing back again, into it and out, into it and out. And so it's an accompanying teaching with what I was just saying, that you can gain Jivan Mukta but still wake up here in the body, a living, liberated soul. India has seen many of them. Avatars are like that. So going through those three quickly, then we see that there's an intermediate causal world, a higher causal world, and a subtlemost world, is how these dvipas would get described. Causal world, there's just no better word in English than the word causal. We're glad we have it. So there's gross, there's subtle, and there's causal. And that's how to explain waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. So when you talk about causal, you're talking about something that all of a sudden went formless on you, and you didn't know why, or you didn't know where you went, and you didn't know what it is. And so people end up asking why, where, what, when, and how. How might be a best question of all of them, but who they never ask. Who is it that's doing this dreaming? And when will the dreamer awake finally to know that all of this is its product of its own dream on 7 different levels, or at least 6 different levels, until it awakens and sees itself as the dreamer. That's a song in India, "O dreamer, awake, awake, you must, you must." You see? So if you awaken this third eye, then you'd be singing something like Jatone hridaye reko Padarini shamamake Jatone hridaye reko Padarini shamamake Mantuida arami deke Mantuida arami deke Arjano ke unahi deke Jatone hridaye reko Padarini shamamake. Kamalakanta sings, O blissful mind, awaken to the enchanting vision of the Divine Mother Shama by opening your inner eye of wisdom. That's really all I need to say, because it's apropos to the subject of this class. It's in a song, not just in the Gita and in the Yoga Sutras and in Yoga Vishishta and in the Kundalini system and in Vedanta. And it's in a song. Kamalakanta sings to himself after having lived enough lifetimes to have heard the Dharma. Oh, awaken to the enchanting vision of Mother Shama by awakening your eye of wisdom, opening your eye of wisdom. The consciousness has to become that concentrated in a dot. That's the bindu. It's not just because you're married that the Hindu women's put that there. It's because it's the destroyer of ignorance. You can now live a life in any of these worlds, as the song said, as the chant said, as a householder or as an ascetic or as a monk. It doesn't matter. If you've opened this eye of wisdom, you're free. You're a jivan mukta. So a beautiful song to strike this home deep in our hearts as well as in our minds, that the philosophy and the yearning of devotees come together at the heart, at the throat, and at the third eye. This is where we want to be. If we're in a form at all, whether it's gross, subtle, or causal, we want to be at those three centers. And that's why Sri Ramakrishna said, I ran a boat race between these three centers with my consciousness for a long time. See, opened up the Sahasrara finally, game over. See, no more races, no more higher worlds or lower worlds, no more hells or heavens or getting beyond them. That's non-duality, that's Advaita. So a fuller understanding of it comes to us by opening this inner eye of wisdom, and we'll explore that in a deeper way after our break. Hari Om Tat Sat Om.